We go. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call to order the Audit Committee meeting for the City of New York on Wednesday, December 15th, 2021. Will the secretary please do the roll call?
Good morning. Starting with our private members, Michael Spitzer, Chair.
Present.
Larry and Angelo.
Present.
Mark Kaplan.
Present.
Bud Larson.
Present.
Representing Mayor Bill de Blasio, Paul Timus.
Present.
Representing Comptroller Scott Stringer, Jacqueline Thompson. Jacqueline, I think you're on mute.
Nope.
Okay, there you go. Representing Public Advocate Jamani Williams, Michael Toomey. Michael?
How about now?
Very
Present?
good.
There he is.
We hear you. Thank you. We have a quorum.
Thank you very much. I'd like to have a motion to accept the minutes of October 25, 2021.
I move it. I'll second it.
Okay, thank you. We're going to follow the agenda, and the first organization that will present will be the Public Realm Improvement Fund Governing Group, Inc. Could you please identify yourselves? Because, and bear with us, there are over 30 people, now we're up to 37 people in attendance, and it's people are all over the screens. So please identify yourselves, whoever's here from the Public Realm, as well as if your auditors are here.
Well, this is EDC. We are the staff of the Public Realm Improvement Fund. It is us that prepares their financials and manages the fund itself and oversees the audit. So we'll be presenting those financial statements today. We have Bob Tuttle on the line, I believe, also, who can talk to the details of what's going on operationally with that fund. And here with us today at the EDC conference room at One Liberty is Spencer Hobson, the head of EDC Finance, Amy Chan, the controller of EDC and the mastermind of all things financial, with her trustee sidekick, Leslie Escobar, who's the deputy controller, and Carol Ann Butler, who's the financial reporting manager. So with that, I'd like to just give you a small background on the Public Realm Improvement Fund, because it'll be the first time we're presenting it to this committee. The Public Realm Improvement Fund commenced operations in October of 2017. The corporation was created by the City of New York's zoning text amendment, section 81-60, to administer the Public Realm Improvement Fund for the exclusive charitable and public purpose of lessening the burden of government for the city and acting in the public's interest by allocating funds from the fund to implement public realm improvement projects in East Midtown. The corporation will accomplish this by utilizing funds deposited into the fund to implement public realm improvement projects in accordance with the Public Realm Improvement Concept Plan and the New York City zoning resolution. Contributions into the fund are received from projects that use development rights for landmarks within the East Midtown subdistrict, or that rebuild non-compliant floor areas per 81-60 of the zoning resolution. Contributions to the fund included a $41.7 million contribution on 12/4/2018 related to development rights at 270 Park Avenue, which is a Grand Central Terminal. There was a second contribution made on October 15th of 21 of $4.8 million, but it was subsequent to the financials that were presented as of 6/31/21. And that had to do with developments at 415 Madison Avenue. As the governing group doesn't have employees, EDC, DCP, and city law all provide administrative support on over various functions. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Leslie Escobar to present the financials.
Good morning. Today I'll be presenting highlights of the fiscal year 2021 financial statements for Public Realm Improvement Fund Governing Group. These statements consist of management's discussion and analysis and the basic financial statements and related footnotes. The financial statements begin with an unmodified opinion from our independent auditors, UHY, There were no significant deficiencies, material weakness, or management letter. For the financial results on page 8, we will start with highlights of the statement of revenues, expenses, and changes in net position. PRIF ended the year with a net position of 42.9 million, which is an increase of approximately 27,000 over last year. There was no contribution activity from transfer of development rights in fiscal year 21, therefore no operating revenues during 2021. Operating expenses totaled 51,000, and non-operating income, which represents investment income, was 78,000. On page 7, we have the statement of net position. PRIF's total assets at June 30, 2021 were 42.9 million, which represents an increase of less than 1% from 6/30/2020. Liabilities totaled 13,000, and PRIF's net position at June 30, 2021 totaled 42.9 million. This concludes the presentation on PRIF's financial results for fiscal year 2021. Does the committee have any questions?
Yes. Does the public realm have an audit committee?
It does.
It does, yes.
And who serves on such audit committee?
Well, myself, I'm Fred Ascoli, and Bob, I don't know if we can identify the other members off the top.
Okay, but you do have an audit committee.
Yes, we do, and I apologize. The the administrative support for this, for organizing those things was in City Hall. He's just recently left the city to pursue other opportunities.
So, okay. Do any members of the city audit committee, Mark?
I have an overarching comment for everybody who's going to appear today. It's my recollection that several years ago, one of the mayors or somebody said that all these materials should be two-sided. And if you look at the total volume of paper that gets used in printing only one side, you can, just at this little old sets of meetings we have, I think each organization ought to think about whether it wants to be better environmentally and print two-sided. That's one. Two, I do have some specific questions though. You say that you invested in, strategically invested in various securities aligning with its investment policy. What was the investment policy?
Yes.
The investment policy is basically the same as what the city controller and the city itself invest in, which is very conservative instruments, particularly since this money has to be available for use in the short term. So it doesn't invest in stocks. It's all basically interest-driven instruments that unfortunately are not exactly generating a great return.
So in effect, you're in short-term maturities. And who runs that? That's not an inconsequential portfolio. Oh, the other overarching comment: the official name of the city of New York has a capital T in it, and you ought to get consistent with the other units which now use the capital T.
Do.
That's a very minor thing. I have a couple of other things. There is something in here about non-compliant floor area. What are we talking about? Rebuild non-compliant floor area. My office was right on 42nd Street until recently, and I'm just curious what non-complying floor areas.
I think that's defined under the zoning law. Oh, Bob is on the line.
Yeah, this is Bob Tuttle from City Planning. I'm happy to take questions on the kind of the planning portion of this. So as part of the neighborhood plan, buildings in the area that were overbuilt, meaning that they were larger than the zoning allows, were allowed to rebuild back their floor area, which is unusual. but was part of trying to make this plan successful. And so those buildings that are larger than they're currently allowed under zoning could pay into the fund to build a new building and incorporate the overage of floor area. And so that the idea being to balance the needs of the community, so public realm needs, but also to encourage buildings to redevelop that otherwise would never redevelop because, well, would likely never redevelop because losing floor area effectively means losing rents.
So is that by and large an issue of the height of the building? Because the buildings are all built out to plot lines, aren't they?
Yes, generally most buildings in that area are built to their lot lines. So it would, it could affect height to some degree, but the existing building is going to have that floor area already existing. So the new building may be taller depending on how they structure the building, but there won't be any new floor area. But yes, it could affect the height of the building, of the new building.
Change the appearance.
Just circling back on the investment information. But there is an investment footnote in the financials, and this is the breakout of the public realms investments for fiscal year 21 and 20. All of the maturities are within a 2-year duration.
And the other comments I have are trivial, but in the footnote 1, you talk about section 81-683, but you don't say what section that's of. So somebody like yours truly, who's a lay reader, doesn't know what you're talking about.
Fair statement. Bob, do you want to elaborate on that?
No, I don't. I just think you should add a word or two of what that is.
No. I mean, I'm sorry. Bob Tuttle, do you want to respond to that?
I think it does say.
I would be happy to.
I was just going to say, it does say in footnote 1 that it's the criteria for improvements in the public realm improvement concept plan. We can go back and add additional language as to what that criteria is.
I just think that would be handy, because I wasn't going to go to our law library to try to figure it out.
Okay. Wait.
Another quick question. COVID-19 has impacted a lot of things, but there's no footnote that I saw in these financials regarding COVID?
As of right now, the fund has not been expended, and the only activity currently for fiscal year 21 and 20 has only been the investment income generated from investments.
Yeah, I think the point to be made, and this unfortunately goes back to Bob again, is that the pace of the construction itself and the impact of COVID on of that process, whether it's meeting with constituencies and neighborhoods and all these kind of things, no doubt was impacted by COVID. But the fund itself, which is the money to be used, not even in first position, the money to be used, has been unaffected in the sense that it's just an investment of funds that's sitting, accumulating, interest until it's called on to be needed. But the other side of the equation, the projects themselves, I'm sure have been impacted by COVID.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, in my opinion, there should be a footnote in there about COVID, but that's for next year.
All right. Mike, I have a couple of other language issues here, but I don't understand. And cash or cash equivalents, it says cash and cash equivalents include all cash balances on deposit. Financial, I understand that. And highly liquid investments purchased with original maturities of 90 days or less to be cash equivalents. That sentence doesn't make any sense. And then
yeah, from an accounting standpoint, a cash equivalent is anything that's purchased.
Oh, I understand. I think you need a couple of words. And then you have something that, as far as I know, the United States government doesn't do. On page 12, you say that guaranteed or collateralized by the US government. The United States government, as far as I know, doesn't collateralize anything. Doesn't have to. Did somebody?
Are there any other questions?
Yeah, I just had a question. I know you guys have said there's been no expenditure from the fund yet, but when there will be expenditure, could you just review what the process is for deciding what you spend it on?
I'm happy to take that, Fred.
Thank you.
So the governing group is a body of 13 representatives. 7 are from mayoral agencies. And then we have a representative appointed by the city council speaker. We have a council member from the Midtown area. We have the borough president of Manhattan. We have representatives from both community boards 5 and 6, which straddle this East Midtown area. And then the borough president of Manhattan also gets to appoint a citywide civic organization. So that creates the body of 13. Either DOT or MTA can put forward projects. The public could put forward projects. Members of the board could put forward projects. Once those are presented and vetted, so if a member of the board puts forward a project, DOT would then look into that project. Let's say if it's a public plaza, a shared street, something of that nature. DOT would do what we call a deeper dive on the project, just to understand at a high level what the cost would be and some of the scope. Once that information is produced, the governing group will vote on the estimated budget. And once that happens, then it really kind of gets kicked over into the city world again. So the funds would move, since we haven't had an expenditure yet, would move from this fund into the account of the agency that's doing the project. So it could be DOT or MTA are the 2 primary agencies.
And the meeting at which you actually make a final decision, is that a public meeting?
It is, yes. All of our meetings are follow the open meetings law.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments regarding the public realm?
Mike, you raised the question of somebody, this organization having something about COVID. Let me just say something I said the other day to somebody. It seems to me that the city ought to have a kind of standardized paragraph or 2 or 3 about COVID, which all of these organizations put in their financial statements, because there can't be a significant difference among them all. And then at least there's a template that everybody could use. I don't know what you want. I would like to think that somebody would think about that.
Okay.
Yes, I would say, however, that there is distinctions in the financials that you'll see today. The impact of COVID on, for instance, EDC's financial statements were kind of pronounced because of the reliance that EDC has on, for instance, the cruise industry and their income that was provided to EDC as a source of what we do. The retail markets, the wholesale food markets,
I recognize that. It seems to me there ought to be a paragraph that says the COVID's around, and then one that deals with the specific issues for each unit.
Point taken.
I'm no more, Mike.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for coming before us this morning. Next up on the agenda is the New York City Industrial Development Agency. For the representatives from there.
It's the same group, so EDC also prepares the financials for IDA. So we will be presenting the business type financial statements for IDA for fiscal year 2021. We'll draw the information from the MD&A within these financials that you see on the screen. For 2021, we did receive an unmodified opinion from our auditors from Ernst & Young. There were no significant deficiencies or material weaknesses identified. For this year ended 2021, the agency adopted GASB 4 related to fiduciary activities and early adopted GASB 91 relating to conduit debt. The impact to GASB 84 resulted in the creation of two newly identified implementation of 84 resulted in two newly created financial statements, which identified custodial funds that IDA has, and they are related to pilot that the agency collects pursuant to lease agreements between IDA and its various lessees on behalf of the city. IDA will remit these funds to the city upon the city's request. GASB 91 was early adopted. Previously, activity relating to tax-exempt pilot bonds issued for the Yankees and Mets stadium projects were carried on IDA's books, as IDA is the true legal owner of the stadia. Now with the adoption of 91, it was determined that this does meet the definition of conduit debt under the GASB, and thus these transactions were removed from the books. And then moving on to financial results, we will be going to the P&L on page 7 on the financials and here on the screen. So net position for the year ended 2021 was 27.8 million, which represents a 7.8 million increase for the prior year. Components of this increase is a result of the increase in operating revenues from 6.4 million to 14.6 million. The main driver of this gain is an increase in the project finance fees recognized from the refunding bond closings related to Yankee and Mets Stadium during 2021. Operating expenses, which are primarily made up of the management fee to EDC, remains flat as compared to the prior year. And under non-operating revenues and expenses, IDA incurred special project costs of 2.2 million, primarily made up of 1.4 million for the Life Science NYC initiative. And with all of these drivers, the current year activity resulted in an increase of net position of 7.8 million. And then the ending net position is 27.8 million, which will go through what makes that up on the previous page, which is the balance sheet. So IDA's net position is primarily made up of cash and investments totaling 32 million, net of $4.6 million of current payables. And with that, we'll take any questions on the financial highlights of IDA's 2021 operations.
Well, same questions that I asked before, does IDA have an audit committee?
Yes.
And I'm guessing then it's the same representatives as the public realm?
No, the IDA has its own board separate from the people that are in this room. So the IDA board is made up. I don't have the board makeup in front of me. I don't think it's part of our financials. But there's an audit committee of 3 members of the board.
Okay, thank you. And my next question, once again, is COVID-19. What was the impact, or is there any impact on IDA?
IDA actually did not have a significant impact as a result of COVID this year. A lot of the transactions that were slated to close last year actually moved to this year. And then we did generate a significant amount of revenue related to the Yankees and Mets pre-funding bonds.
I think it might be, no, it's hard. I've seen a couple in what I do in which the company stated that they did not have an impact the virus did not have an impact on them. Because the thought was, everybody asked the question, so you might as well answer it with a footnote. But I leave that to you guys. What is a monitoring fee? Compliance monitoring. What are those? It's in footnote 2 on page 21. And I wasn't familiar with it, so that's why I asked.
Yeah, the compliance fees are the annual administrative fees for each of the projects. They range from 500 to 1,000 a project.
So that's what the monitoring fees, that's what it's, okay. Well, if you don't know that, it's hard to figure that out. Then you have something else on the next page where you say that they're collateralized with securities held by the pledging financial institution. What you have here is the bank. I'm not sure I understand how this would work, but if you have a $1 million deposit, you expect to have the bank puts up collateral security, but that's not the pledging financial institution, is it?
Well, that is it is the bank. It is the bank themselves that are putting up government security.
I understand that. Well,
right.
Just I hadn't seen this kind of formulation. Then there's the next page. It says an attempt to maximize yields on limited offerings. So much dollars were invested of investment in limited offerings. So many dollars of investment in banknotes purchased on. So it doesn't follow. You maximize yields, you bought those things. You don't say that here. You say they purchased and matured on. Well, it's not, I don't want to bother you with that. In the next paragraph, you say the investment securities exposed to custodial credit risk. If the securities are uninsured, the securities are never insured. It's their, that's not the right word here. If they're not registered in the name of the agency, yes. But if you're talking about the securities themselves are not insured, it's the obligation to that has the pledgor has. I don't think that formulation is correct. And then you have something called, on page 24, current total deobligate. What does the concept of deobligate mean here?
So that is a reference to our special project where the IDA will help supplement a certain cost, and there's an obligation at the beginning. If those projects do not, come to fruition or only meet a certain level of expenses short of the obligation, then we in fact deobligate the remaining balance.
So that's understood. I hadn't been familiar with it.
I have a same area. These are projects. Are these conduit debt projects?
The IDA conduit debt is primarily currently a function of the Build NYC Corporation. The IDA had issued conduit debt over the years and discontinued 2008. So there's still a lot of outstanding conduit debt on that was issued by IDA. Thus, the refinancing fee generated from the Stadia projects going to IDA because they were involved with that conduit debt issuance. But currently, since 2008, there hasn't been, they don't issue conduit debt. They primarily issue, abatements of different types tax abatements, mortgage recording taxes, sales taxes, et cetera. That's their major vehicle, and managing the existing outstanding conduit debt that was issued prior to their discontinuance of doing that.
At one time, and I don't know if it was a separate report or was actually a footnote, there was actually a listing of all the conduit debt that was issued by IDA and the projects that were funded by the conduit debt.
Yes, you're absolutely right. There was a point in time where that was done. The auditors, how many years ago has it been? 3?
About 3 years ago, they put it as a website disclosure.
Yeah, it's a website disclosure now, not included in the financials, because quite frankly, that part that you're talking about was probably 4 times the size of the financials themselves. There's a lot of information, good information.
No, I'm just talking about I'll just call it Yankee Stadium.
Right.
What was the total amount? What were the projects and the amounts? That's all.
Right, and up until this year, one of the GASBs that Amy talked about earlier just was issued, by the FASB, or was it GASB? Yes, it was GASB. That defined, because they wanted a uniformity across all financial statements. They issued a new definition of what was going to be considered conduit debt. The stadium projects up until that point were not considered conduit debt. They were carried on the financials themselves. And that's, I think, what you're referring to. Up until the last time you saw these financials, those 2 conduit debts for the stadium projects were included in excruciating detail in the financial statements themselves because they were not considered conduit debt. With the new GASB's release, those 2 now fall into the threshold as conduit debt as well. So they were removed from the financials, which is a big change to the financials. So you're absolutely right to notice it, because it was $1.5 billion, $1.8 billion, 2.4 billion worth of assets and liabilities that were removed from the financials, as well as the related income and expenses. So it really did obviate the financials themselves that were really IDA. What you're seeing now is a clear picture, quite frankly, of what IDA itself does as an entity.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments from the audit committee member? Larry?
Yeah, I'm wondering if you guys could spend a few minutes talking about the Federal Farm Credit Bank asset that you purchased, and the fact that it was 3 months beyond what your rules say it should be. And I understand 24 months, 27 months is not that big a deal usually, but this is about liquidity and not rate of return. So you just talk a little bit about that, please.
Sure. So we endeavored to make sure that all investments were, we always endeavor to make sure that all investments are within our guidelines. We had a significant amount of cash at year end due to the Yankee and Met refinancings, which we've sort of described at length. And as opposed to sitting on the cash, we only had certain options. And the only option that we had was to go a little bit outside of our 24-month investment period. That was all that was available at the time in June. And so yes, we did. The management did make the decision to go ahead and invest temporarily for liquidity purposes.
And it was discussed, and I think I have to compliment you on it's an astute observation, but it was discussed in great detail with the auditors for exactly the same reason you're bringing up. And the question that was discussed is exactly, what is a reasonable amount of flexibility? They did not think that a 3-month difference was really material. So they decided that it was fine. But going forward, they recommended that we amend our investment policy to officially incorporate the management discretion parameters. So we're endeavoring to do that now.
And would those parameters include some measure of available liquidity? Because cash is king, And it's always good to have some cash floating around. And so I'm just wondering if those new parameters will include some measure of liquidity that will then allow you to be more flexible in the investments you make.
We will consider that, but again, I think that the decision was made with the tacit understanding that we had 18 million in cash on hand, which is noted in the financials. So we did not see it as something that would challenge the liquidity of the organization.
So no, I hear what you're saying, but since you've said that there's going to be some change in your internal rules on that, and since the 24-month guideline was about making sure you have liquidity, when you change those rules, will you incorporate some measure of liquidity? Will there be some level of liquidity that will trigger, you can't go beyond whatever level of or length of investment you choose to make?
I think, again, you're making an excellent point, because one thing that the board did, I'm going to say it was 2 years ago, it could have been 3, was to establish a threshold that they did not want to go below in terms of their unrestricted assets to fund the special projects. So the special projects is of the things that the IDA spends money on, the largest single thing is, of course, the cost of running their organization, which is probably $4 million. But the other piece of it is what we call special projects, which is what the defunding that the de-obligating that was brought up earlier had to do with, where we'll present periodically to the board maybe it's a workforce development project, something that is in line with the mission of the IDA, and then they'll agree that that's within their mission and it's a worthy project, and they'll agree to fund it. But what happened is they decided exactly what you're talking about now is like, wait a minute, we don't want to be left at a level that we feel like you've compromised us as an organization. If we have a couple of bad years, we want to be able to weather the storm, especially relative to what happened with COVID and things like that. So as a result, the board did adopt a threshold that they did not want to go below in terms of making decisions to fund the special projects, so that they would maintain liquidity. And further on that point, the liquidity that we have, investments, maybe it's the farm credit or various, conservative, governmental instruments, but we always have the ability to liquidate. So your point's well taken. I think we will, when we revisit the investment discussion, we'll also throw in the liquidity requirements.
No, but isn't it true that the securities you're invested in, that you could sell them in a minute?
Yes,
that's correct.
So these are not fixed obligations where you are the lender and you can't get your money out. So there's a ready market for these things. So in terms of the availability of cash, one of the reasons for having it this short term, even if it goes out a little bit, is that you may take a couple of percentage points off if you have to do it in a hurry, but you're not going to suffer a real liquidity crisis by going out 3 months longer.
Right.
It depends on the paper you buy.
And to Spencer's point, we did have $15 million of cash at the end of the year. So really we wanted to be prudent and, with the cash that we weren't planning on using right away, earn some sort of yield on it. And just given the market conditions, there wasn't a lot to choose from, which is why management chose, that investment with the 27-month duration, just to earn a little something. Because right now it costs money to put money in the bank.
Right. I'm not questioning the decision, the current decision you made. But I just am asking, next year when you come to us, you'll raise the issue again and explain your liquidity thresholds and triggers, et cetera.
Yes.
That's great. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
Oh.
No. I'd like to thank you for the presentation of IDA. I assume it's the same people now for EDC. Excuse me.
Okay, so now we'll jump into EDC and present the 2021 business type financial statements for EDC, again, drawing the information from the MD&A. Same thing with the opinion, unmodified from our auditors from Ernst & Young. There were no significant deficiencies or material weaknesses identified. We also implemented GASB 84 related to fiduciary activities for this year. As a result, we opted to do a single year presentation of the basic financials. Also, in accordance with the requirements of the standard, we created a set of fiduciary financial statements to report EDC's fiduciary activity, which consists of the corporation's OPEB trust. And then moving on to page 7, which is the condensed operating activity, the P&L. We ended the year with a net position of 546 million, which is a decrease of approximately 18 million over last year. The components causing the decrease in net positions is as follows. Under operating revenues, revenues at the end of the year totaled 922 million, a decrease of 19 million over fiscal year 2020. An increase of 19 million over 2020. The increase in revenues was driven by the increase in fees and other income category, which is primarily due to income generated by remediation work at Hunts Point and is offset by related expenses. This increase is partially offset by the decrease in reimbursable grants revenue of 5 million as compared to prior year. Just to note that EDC recognizes grant revenue in direct proportion to the amount of related reimbursable project and program expenses incurred, and with the reduction in project and program costs, offsetting revenues also decreased. With COVID-19, with the pandemic continuing into fiscal year 2021, real estate sales and rental income continue to decline. Real estate sales declined by 1.7 million and property rental revenues decreased 1 million from the prior year. It continues to be significantly down from pre-pandemic levels. Operating expenses decreased by 42 million to 948 million as EDC continued to manage spending during the pandemic. Project and program costs decreased by 17 million due to decrease in city-funded reimbursable grants and offsetting expenses, as well as lower spending on our own self-funded initiatives during the fiscal year. Property rental expenses decreased by 16 million. EDC decreased spending related to rental properties. We only focused on life and safety work, the priority life and safety work. Additionally, as Fred had mentioned, cruise operations continue to be suspended due to the pandemic. Ferry-related expenses, net of revenues, decreased by 20 million, and the decrease is directly resulting from the pandemic-driven reduction in ferry services provided. And other expenses increased by 14 million. The increase is primarily due to tenant bad debt, as well as depreciation expense, offset by a reduction in our general and administrative costs as we continue to cut costs. With operating revenues of 922 million and operating expenses of 948 million, we ended the year with an operating loss of 26 million, which was offset by the investment income of 77 million, as well as capital contributions from the city of 8 million. And these capital contributions were to fund the purchase of assets, primarily ferry vessels, which are managed and maintained by EDC to run the NYC ferry program. All of these components led to a decrease in net position of 18 million, and we ended the year with 546. And then on the previous page is our balance sheet. And this will kind of just walk through what makes up our net position and how we got there. So assets decreased 10 million to 1.2 billion. There was an increase in our tenant receivables of 14 million, directly resulting from the continued pandemic. There was a decrease of capital assets of 9 million, primarily due to depreciation expense. And there was also a decrease of 64 million in our receivables from the city due to the amounts collected during the fiscal year attributable to the COVID PPE costs and vessel acquisition amounts fronted by EDC that were pending reimbursement as of the prior fiscal year. And then EDC ended with total liabilities of 673 million, a decrease of 1.5 million, which is relatively flat as compared to last year. And with the result of these components, EDC's ending net position was 546 million. And at this point, we'll be happy to take questions.
I have one overarching one. How is the ferry business doing?
The ferry business is actually doing well now. The ridership has come back to about 80+% of its pre-pandemic levels, which is higher than any other of mass transit operators in the city. So in that respect, it's doing well. It's not an inexpensive service to run, and we are petitioning the city to make sure that we have the funds available to pay for the operating costs.
So what you're saying, as I understand it now, is that the thing is running at a big loss and the cost per passenger is probably a lot higher than you expected. Is that it?
The ferry service has always run at a deficit. There has never been any time in the life of the service that it has made money or even approached that, because a policy decision was made at inception that the amount to be charged per ride was going to be the same as the cost of a subway ride or a bus ride at $275, and definitely the cost per trip is beyond that. So there is definitely an operating deficit for that service.
Yes.
Wildly popular too, I might add. Just as a
well, if you're getting something cheap, you like it, don't you?
Sure.
What is a cap? There's a net operating loss of 26 million, offset by a capital contributions of 8 million. That's an odd thing because offset implies that you're still short a lot of millions there.
It does, and it's kind of an anomaly. It gets back to the ferry service, I believe, because those are basically the cost of ferry vessels that EDC itself fronted with its unrestricted reserves, and then got paid back from the city subsequent to that. So even though it looks like if you look at our bottom line, it is offsetting. If you look at matter of fact, the slide that Amy has up here right now, that increase would have accrued to, if you look at the net position breakout, where it says 87 million, 146 million, and 312 million.
Yeah.
8 million would have accrued to the $312 million line, even though up above in the total, just it's part of our total. But when you break out where exactly that total accumulated to, it was an increase in the investment in capital assets at 312 million, which is a majority of that line is the ferry vessels themselves, which we're carrying on our books.
So we're running a business at loss as a policy matter, and we don't. If we were a private company, we would offset that loss against some other income. Has anybody ever looked at whether or not there's some game here that take advantage of the loss carry forward we're creating to turn it into something that can be used to offset other income by somebody else? We're doing it in some of the housing areas.
Yeah, I don't think that we have, because obviously we don't pay taxes, so the net operating loss carry forward wouldn't benefit us. My guess is that
I know that.
Yeah. So but could we package and sell that? I think we actually did look at this at one time. I don't think that we're allowed to do that.
Well, let me point out that the New York City Housing Authority is looking at doing just that.
Okay. Well, we should talk to them then. Well,
I don't know. I don't know how good they are at it, but I'm also on that committee, and I've heard about a lot about the structuring they're trying to do with various things, which they somehow enable the losses to get into private hands.
It's interesting. I don't know enough about their structure, but it's a point taken. I would love that. It would make my day if I could sell loss carry.
Listen, it's not easy, but I just mentioned it. Yeah.
Okay.
And then you say here that the increase in unearned revenues is primarily due to $12 million funds received in the city for sales of property, 125th Street, to be used for future maintenance costs. The to be used where does it hang on that? Maintenance cost of what?
Is that restricted funds?
Yeah, it's restricted I think it's the NUL funds.
Yeah.
When we sold it, we deferred it. And
Right.
we will recognize revenue and expense.
Well, it's not easily understood from that. So
Yeah, those are funds that, again, we show them as revenue because they're income stream to us, but they're really restricted in terms of they can't be used, for instance, for our operations. They have to be used specifically for.
Okay, I can understand that. And then, well, here's my comments further, and then there's always a tendency when you have a capital asset in a losing business not to invest adequately in the maintenance of that asset. How are you doing in terms of the fleet of boats?
That's a fair. I mean, yeah, and believe me, I have a long history in that kind of a situation, but I don't. This is very different. These assets, which I think you're talking primarily about the ferry vessels,
Yeah.
Are strictly maintained. First of all, there's Coast Guard and maritime laws that require a very rigid maintenance regimen. And midlife overhauls and all the rest that goes. You can imagine the risk there would be to public safety if that were not the case. So there's definitely no compromise at all in terms of the maintenance of the fleet vessels. And the assets themselves are actually paid for with city capital money. They're carried on our books because we're the ones that use them in revenue service. We're the ones that maintain and operate them. So based on GASB's criteria, we're the ones that are responsible for carrying on our books. So as you look at this, the balance sheet that's on the screen now, that $312 million in capital assets is offset by an asset on the other side of it for an equivalent amount. So we don't really look at the ferry vessels, from that perspective. If I were maybe a private entity, some of the other private ferry operators that are here in the city, I might consider that, but it's very cutting off your nose to spite your face kind of thing to do, because obviously if your vessels were in bad repair and you started to not be able to operate on a timely basis, your ridership would drop off and you wouldn't make any money. So it is a conundrum. But what you are describing is actually what exactly has happened in a lot of private transportation companies, which has germinated the mass transit industry itself, because most of the mass transit industry, including here in New York, were at one time private operators, and they were privately operated. And because they decided to not invest in their assets because they weren't making enough money, ultimately, the local, municipal, and federal governments came in to take over and support those systems, which is what created the FTA and a lot of the mass transit systems you see today.
Okay, now there's one more arching issue. You refer to an OPEB trust.
Right.
Are you not part of the city OPEB
No.
plan? So you actually have a trust and the money sits there?
Yes, we're not part of the city's NYSER pension system or their OPEB. I don't even know if they have the Yeah, they do have, they have a huge OPEB liability.
Giant.
Like giant. So we, at a point in time, what year did we fund that? Remember?
I want to say 4 years ago.
2018.
2018, we had the opportunity to, to fund the OPEB liability, and we've done very well with, we obviously have a tiny fraction of what the city has in terms of, and it's a frozen plan. So we don't offer it to any, to any future employees. So it's allowed us to, to put guardrails on what the liability is and who it applies to, as opposed to a growing OPEB liability. So that because the new GASB that Amy mentioned is now required to be a disclosure, whereas before, because it's a trust, it's not really an EDC asset, but we still have to disclose.
Because the city one, as you know, is over $100 billion.
Oh yeah, yeah, it's astronomical.
It's a scary number.
Very.
Are there any other questions or comments regarding EDC?
No.
Okay, if there are none, I'd like to thank the representatives of EDC. It was very informative this morning. And I guess you have 3 presentations.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're happy to present. And thank you for your comments.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is the Brooklyn Public Library. Could the representatives identify yourselves as well as if your auditors are here?
Good morning. I'm just waiting for my video to start. This is Karen Sheehan from the Brooklyn Public Library. Oh, there I am. Okay, good morning. I'm Karen Sheehan, the Brooklyn Public Library's Executive Vice President for Finance and Administration, and I'm joined today by Amadou Waji, our Vice President for Finance, as well as LD Wilson from the auditing firm Eisner Amper. Thanks to the contributions of the City of New York, BPL continues to play an integral role in the lives of Brooklynites in fiscal year 2021. BPL is proud of its efforts in the fiscal year to restore services throughout Brooklyn after the prolonged COVID-19 related closure in a manner that balances public health concerns with our patrons' very real need for in-person library services. In fiscal year 2021, BPL vastly expanded its digital offerings with 550,000 audio and ebooks, up from 350,000 pre-pandemic levels. BPL also hosted approximately 12,000 virtual and outdoor programs with attendance of just under 740,000 individuals. By the end of the fiscal year, we fully restored in-person browsing and computer sessions, and by the end of the summer, we invited patrons to sit and enjoy the library without restrictions. During fiscal year 2021, BPL also entered into an exciting partnership with the Brooklyn Historical Society. On October 1st, 2020, Brooklyn Public Library entered into an affiliation agreement with the Brooklyn Historical Society to create the Center for Brooklyn History, which combined the historical collections of the library as well as those of the Historical Society. And the goal is to create the largest collection of Brooklyn's history to meet the needs of the borough's diverse communities. As part of the affiliation agreement, the Society reorganized its corporation structure as to become a membership organization with the library as the sole member effective on the affiliation date. According to the agreement, the library has the right to select all board members for the society. In accordance with GAAP, the library must account for the transaction as an acquisition and recognize the society's assets and liabilities at the fair value on the date of the acquisition. Therefore, the library is required to prepare consolidated financial statements for FY21, combining its financial position with those of the solely controlled, its solely controlled entity, the Brooklyn Historical Society. For fiscal year 2021, our auditors, Eisner Amper, issued an unmodified opinion on our consolidated financial statements. And the following are some highlights and a summary of that financial position. As of June 30th, 2021, the library had total assets of $208.4 million, up approximately $34 million from FY 2020. The year-end cash and cash equivalents balance increased by $11 million over FY20, mainly due to the collection of outstanding receivables from the city and state of New York. Our restricted cash in segregated accounts decreased by $11.6 million from FY20 due to the payment of expenditures associated with ongoing construction projects at the Brooklyn Heights and Adams Street branches. BPL receivables decreased by $11.5 million in FY20, primarily due to the collection of outstanding receivables from the city and state, and $1.9 million due from the IRS COVID pandemic employee retention credit. The fair value of BPL's investments increased by $10.8 million from FY20, primarily due to the improved performance of the financial markets. Property and equipment increased by approximately $33.2 million over the last year, primarily due to the cost of various construction-related projects, as well as the value of consolidating the fixed assets of the Brooklyn Historical Society, mainly the value of their building, which was appraised at $16.9 million. BPL reports a loan payable of $1.4 million, representing the outstanding loans of the Brooklyn Historical Society payable to the Bank of America. BPL's net borrowing from our TD Bank line of credit was down approximately $900,000 from $4.3 million to $3.4 million in FY21. Our accrued wages and related liability decreased by 4.5 from FY21. This is in large part due to changes in the library's terminal leave obligations and the value of accrued vacation time. BPL's total net assets increased by $3.4 million over FY20, mostly as stated earlier because of the BHS net assets and the gain in investments, as well as an operating surplus for the year. The total operating revenues and support were $178.8 million, down $6.8 million from last year. This change is primarily due to the net impact of the following. Private foundation and donor contributions were up $1.8 million because of increased efforts of our development team. However, contributed facilities and utilities were down $3.7 million from FY20 because of the reduction in general market rent due to the pandemic, as well as an adjustment to the methodology. Fines, royalties, and other revenues were down $5.3 million from FY20, in part due to the suspension of fines, as well as the non-recurrence of the employees' retention credit from the IRS. Total operating expenses decreased by $13.6 million to $166.2 million from FY20. This is mainly due to salary and related expenses were down 6.8 because of decrease in terminal leave obligations, a contraction in service hours during the return to service, and year-end vacation accruals. Professional fees were down approximately $2.8 million from 2020 due to the non-recurrence of certain programmatic activities. Books and library materials spending was down $1.2 million from FY20 due to a reduction in city funding. And donated rent and utilities were down $3.7 million because of property rental market and methodology adjustment. We also had non-operating activities in FY21 that included construction grants received from the state totaling approximately $2.3 million for the South Side project, grants and capital contribution revenue of approximately $10.9 million, including $600,000 from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and $10.3 million in the New York City capital grant revenue for the Greenpoint and Central Library Phase 1 projects. $4.8 million in restricted contributions were released from restriction when the Greenpoint branch was placed into service in October 2020. BPL reports additional additions to the net assets of $15.3 million in in-kind contributions as part of the affiliation with the Brooklyn Historical Society. And finally, investment income not used for operations went up approximately $9.8 million during the fiscal year, thanks to favorable market conditions. This concludes my report regarding BPL's financial statement. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much.
Before you ask any questions, may I also just point out that Miriam Kadowitz, our treasurer, is on with us.
Thank you, Amadou.
Okay, are there anybody else that should be identified for the record? Okay, thanks. Question, once again, do you have an audit committee?
Yes. Yes, we do.
Okay, and once again, the disclosures for COVID, like there are lots of reasons that you identified, like income was down or expenses were down related to COVID, but you know, a footnote.
There is one for COVID.
Yeah, maybe.
If you give me a minute, I'll tell you what page it's on.
Page 30.
Page 30.
Yeah, it's here, Mike.
Yeah, no, I mean, okay, enough. Do any other audit committee members have any issues or questions?
Let me just point out, to take Mike's point about COVID,
Mhm.
and I said this every time, it seems to me that there ought to be some overarching thing for all these funds that get supplied by the controller's office, because each one is somewhat different, but there's all sorts of language that you see in these things that isn't here. And I don't know whether it would be wise to have everything in the city looking at some basic kind of disclosure. But let me switch on to some specifics, Mike. On page 17, there's various risks that's talked about. It doesn't talk about currency risk. And I don't know if anything in the portfolio or the hedge funds that they're in gets affected by currency. But I raised that question.
There currently isn't, for FY21 there isn't, or there wasn't, because the hedge fund for that was dissolved. We sold it off at the end of FY20, coming into FY21, we received all the proceeds from it, so there was nothing.
Okay.
That was eliminated for it.
If I can, I had a couple of other comments. In the litigation section, you do say there's insurance, so that's, sorry, I didn't catch it the first time around, but there it is. I have a couple more things here, if you bear with me. Go through them.
Well, he's looking.
Oh, if you go to page 25, just a little thing, in 8, you say that there were 3 funds underwater, and then you say you only talk about 2 of the 3. That's a tiny little thing, but there's an inconsistency there.
You mentioned in your presentation a rather large reduction in terminal leave. Was that because of a labor agreement or some change in process? What caused that reduction?
It has to do with the terminal leave, the sick leave balances that was used to calculate the terminal leave, and the drop in the effective interest rate, or the change in the effective interest rate.
What resulted in that change, though? It was a very large reduction.
So in terms of the leave balances, it has to do, there's a corresponding effect of it on the vacation accrual, because what we did do, we allowed people to carry over, because of the COVID in FY20, we allowed people to carry over their vacation time until December. And as a result, anything not used at the end of December was transferred to sick leave balance, and most people use the sick leave balance during that year. And primarily, as you can see, in terms of the interest rate changed significantly which was one of the driving factors.
I guess I'm still not following.
I'm trying to turn to the
Can I-
page.
So one factor is that FY 2020, we ended FY 2020 with an abnormally high balance because we allowed staff to keep their accruals in for an additional and use it for an additional 6 months in FY 21. So part of the swing has to do with the fact that FY 2020 was an unusually high year.
So if you had 19 here, it would be closer to what we're seeing in 21.
That is correct.
That's correct.
I have one specific comment and then a general one. In the concentration of credit risk, you say that you don't think
page?
it's the last page. It's page 32. You don't collateralize it, and you don't say that you continuously monitor the quality of the financial institutions. Those are disclosure items that a number of the other organizations provide. And I assume that that's true here too.
So, I mean, two things. Firstly, we do not collateralize it because as an independent 501c3 corporation, we're not required to, and we've approached the banks about it on several occasions, and they would not do that. If for any reason they have to do that, we have to pay for it, and the price is very steep.
Well, then you may want to say that you monitor the performance of the banks.
So, I mean, which is what we're saying in the last sentence, that we believe that, I mean, the banks that we have, I mean, are solid banks that we have our balances with.
Yeah, some people put that disclosure in that if they don't collateralize it, they monitor the performance of the banks. Just think about that. And the other thing here is a totally different point. You and the Queens Library are both public libraries in the city of New York. Is there anything in common that you could do with purchasing or otherwise to save money? And has anybody ever thought about that?
Oh, yes.
I'll bet.
Mm-hmm. So,
Karen?
Go, Karen.
So yes, not with the Queens Public Library explicitly, but about 10 years ago, we entered into an agreement to consolidate the back of the house book operations with the New York Public Library, and that's been a very favorable partnership with NYPL. On other fronts, we maximize our buying power with NYPL, but we also maximize operating efficiency with them. As far as other opportunities, I meet bi-weekly with our counterparts in the other systems, and we're always looking for opportunities to make our operations collectively more efficient.
And that's wonderful. Maybe you could talk to the pension funds about trying to do the same thing.
Will do.
Are there any other comments or questions? Hearing none, thank you very much for coming this morning. And next on the agenda is the Queens Borough Public Library.
Yes, good morning. Mike Tregale, CFO for Queens Public Library. I'm joined by our controller, Vishnu Dewa, as independent auditors from BDO, Ritesh Lal, the insurance partner, and Christino Policino. Basically, just to give you an update on the budgets. So our operating budget for 21 was 172.9 million. Obviously, we also were closed for a portion, and then we had various models of being open, grab and go type services, where we had the ability to safely bring people in to pick up materials and leave. Currently, we have 57 locations open. 33 of them are on six-day service, 23 5-day service, and one is on 7-day service. So for the most part, we've recovered.
Cindy?
We have a number of branches that are closed.
Hi, listen, I'm in the middle of a
Different types of
meeting. Can I
work.
call you back? Yeah.
Just to give an update, some of the highlights. This is our third year,
I would
no
love to, but I
management
can't.
findings.
I'm in meetings all day.
It's our second year
Okay, bye-bye.
credit. And in terms of our investments, we're up 6.6 million, 18% year over year. So at this point, I'm just going to turn it over to Ritesh Lal of BDO to give some other highlights of the budget. And before I do that, I just wanted to point out, we do have indications of the effects of COVID on page 14 of the statement. We were in a similar boat with BPL in terms of the absence carryover issue, which is also noted on page 14. So I'll turn it over to Ritesh. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike. And good morning, everyone. Ritesh Lal from BDO, Independent Auditors for the Queens Borough Public Library. Just to give you a high-level summary of the audit, we issued an unmodified opinion on the financial statements for Queens Library. There were no material weaknesses that came to our attention during the audit. All information or records were freely available to us during the audit, and we had the full cooperation of management. If there's any other questions on the audit, we'd be more than happy to take it at this time. But at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to the committee.
Thank you. A quick question. Yeah, yes, I saw the COVID, but just for the record, do you have an audit committee for Queens?
You have an audit committee.
Okay. Thank you. Are there any questions or comments from members of the city's audit committee?
I'm looking, Mike, for stuff that really you have the same thing about your finance, about your cash here. Now, when you have money market funds, you say class it, you don't indicate, I think that's true, that you value those using, since it's a fund and a money market fund, at net asset value. And which is different than readily marketable securities. Am I right?
And those money market funds, Mike, correct me if I understand correctly, those are publicly traded money market funds, right? Yes.
Correct.
They're traded and not net asset. You can't. They're not the ones so you redeem.
They're not on net NAV now.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I'm just going through my markups here.
We've done a good job the last few years correcting everything else, Mark. So that's fine.
We tried.
You've come a long way since a number of years ago.
Thank you.
We tried.
A lot of negative press regarding the library. You've come a long way.
We've cleaned things up pretty well there.
Well, I'm done, Mike.
Okay. Thank you. And thank you for coming before us this morning, and good luck going forward.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Take care. Have a good holiday.
Happy holidays. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Same. At this time, I'd like to have a motion to go into executive session. There is one item, a couple of items, I guess, that we will be going over in executive session.
I move we go into executive session.
I second the motion.
Okay, thank you. We are now back in session to the open public meeting. One comment I would like to make is there was part of the package that was distributed is the calendar of meetings to take place over the calendar year 2022. So I just ask all members just to review it, especially the next couple of meetings, just so that the controller's office can line up these entities to meet with us. So, just review that and be prepared the next meeting, or get to Katrina any issues or comments you might have about the calendar. With that said, and there's nothing else before us, I'd like to have a motion to adjourn the public session.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Thank you.
Say, would somebody send me that thing with the dates for next year?